Captain Elias Monroe had never expected that his life would lead him to the palace of the most feared ruler in the galaxy. When he was chosen as Earth's diplomat to the Zerillan Empire, he thought it would be another tense round of negotiations, with careful words and stiff handshakes. Yet as the human ship approached the glittering capital world of Zyrus Prime, Elias felt that something different waited for him. The Zerillans were known across the stars for their cold logic, their strict hierarchy, and their ruthless efficiency. They were not a species that tolerated mistakes. They had conquered dozens of systems with speed and precision, ruling through fear and obedience. Their queen, Sarilith, was whispered to be as unshakable as stone. No one had ever seen her laugh, smile, or even falter in judgment. Her word was law, her gaze was enough to silence entire councils, and her empire stretched farther than the human mind could comfortably imagine. Elias had studied her record before leaving Earth. Every negotiation, every decree, every decision was clear, calculated, and merciless. She was respected and feared in equal measure. His superiors warned him that one wrong phrase could bring disaster, not just for him, but for all humanity. And yet, as he sat in the shuttle descending toward the palace, Elias could not help but grin to himself. He had always believed that humor was humanity's greatest shield. Where other diplomats would bow stiffly, Elias relied on quick wit and easy charm. He had once joked his way out of a pirate ambush, and another time he had turned an angry trade dispute into a friendly dinner. But he knew this was different. This time, a single misplaced word might cost him his life. The shuttle touched down, on a landing platform of black stone that gleamed like glass. Zyrillan guards in silver armor stood at attention, their tall forms motionless. Their insect-like eyes glittered, but they showed no emotion. Elias stepped out, straightening his uniform, and forced himself to look calm. The guards did not speak, but they turned sharply and led him through tall archways carved with alien symbols. The palace was vast, every corridor towering, built to remind all who entered of their smallness. The walls shimmered with faint patterns that shifted like flowing water. The silence was heavy, broken only by the echo of footsteps. Elias could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. Finally, the guards stopped before immense doors that opened without a sound. Beyond them was a throne room so enormous that it seemed like the heart of a starship. At its far end, seated on a throne of crystal and metal, was Queen Sarilith. She was unlike anything Elias had imagined. Her figure was tall and elegant, clad in flowing garments that shimmered with strange light. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and endless, as if they carried galaxies within them. She looked down upon him with a gaze that seemed to pierce through his very thoughts. She was beautiful, but in a way that was alien and overwhelming, more like a force of nature than a person. The chamber was silent. Courtiers lined the walls, watching. Every one of them expected this human to tremble, to bow, to stammer. Elias walked forward with steady steps, though his heart raced. He stopped at the respectful distance, bowed slightly, and waited. The queen's voice filled the hall, smooth and cold. "Human envoy, you stand before Sarilith, sovereign of the Zerillan Empire, keeper of the eternal order, mistress of the stars. State your purpose." Her words were flawless, delivered without pause or warmth. Elias felt the weight of every title. He inhaled slowly and smiled faintly. "I come in peace, Your Majesty," he said. "Earth hopes to build friendship with the Zerillan Empire. We have much to offer and much to learn." There was no reaction. The courtiers remained motionless, their eyes unblinking. The queen tilted her head slightly, studying him like one might study a strange insect. "You speak of peace," she said. "Your species is young, fragile. You have no fleets to match ours, no armies to resist us. Why should we waste time on friendship with you?" The words cut like blades, but Elias did not falter. He had known this would be the test. He had read 100 reports telling him to respond with data, to present Earth's resources, trade routes, and tactical value. But Elias knew numbers would not move her. Logic was her language, but logic alone would not win her interest. Instead, he smiled wider. "Because, Your Majesty," he said, You've conquered dozens of worlds. You've ruled countless people. But you've never had a friend who could make you laugh. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt as though the air itself had frozen. The courtiers stiffened, some glaring at him in horror. A murmur rippled faintly, quickly silenced. No one dared to joke in the presence of the queen. To do so was seen as madness. Her eyes fixed on him, sharp as blades. For a long moment she did not move. Then, very slightly, her lips curved, only a fraction, but it was unmistakable. A smile. The court gasped. Elias felt his own heart skip. He had not expected it to work so quickly, yet here it was. The smallest crack in the wall of ice. He pressed on, gently, but boldly. "You see, Majesty," he said softly. "Humans are fragile, yes, we are young, yes, but we survive because we laugh even in the darkest nights, sometimes especially in the darkest nights. That is something we bring that no empire can measure on a chart." The queen leaned back in her throne, her eyes never leaving his. For the first time, she seemed to hesitate. Her voice, though still, steady, carried a faint curiosity. "You believe such frivolity has value?" "I don't just believe it," Elias replied, with his easy grin. "I know it." The courtiers were stunned into silence. The queen, however, tilted her head again, her gaze intense. "Interesting," she murmured, almost to herself. Then louder, she said, "We shall see." The negotiations that followed were tense yet strangely different than what anyone expected. The queen listened with a focus that unsettled her own advisors. Elias continued with honesty and occasional wit, never pushing too far but always reminding her of humanity's uniqueness. To the court's astonishment, she did not dismiss him. By the time the day ended, a fragile agreement was signed, nothing final, but enough to keep peace. As Elias prepared to leave the throne room, he glanced back at the queen. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes lingered on him longer than they had on anyone else. That night, in the silence of her private chamber, Queen Seralith sat alone. She had ruled without doubt or hesitation for decades. Yet now a single human's words echoed in her mind. His smile, his boldness, his strange insistence that laughter was strength. She did not understand it. She could not dismiss it. For the first time in her long reign, the queen felt curiosity not for conquest, but for a person. And far away in his quarters, Elias lay awake, smiling to himself. He had seen it in her eyes, just for a moment, the beginning of something no one could have imagined. The days after the first meeting were unlike anything Elias had expected. He had thought the queen would dismiss him once the agreement was signed, perhaps send him back to Earth with cold instructions. Instead, she made a surprising decree. He was to remain at the palace as a liaison between Earth and the Zerillan Empire. On the surface, it sounded like a practical arrangement, but Elias knew better. She wanted him close. The courtiers did not like it. He could feel their eyes on him in every hall, hear their whispers echoing in the silence. They thought him unworthy, a fragile outsider. Their empire was built on order, precision, and obedience, and he was none of those things. He was loose, casual, and far too unafraid of their queen. But Elias had learned long ago that the best way to disarm fear was to smile through it. So he walked the halls with easy steps, as though he belonged. Life inside the palace was a constant reminder of how different the Zerillans were. Meals were taken in silence, each guest seated according to rank, each dish portioned according to calculated need. Music, when played, was mathematical, with no rise or fall, only a steady rhythm. The courtiers spoke in measured tones, never laughing, never raising their voices. It was a world without warmth, polished and gleaming but cold. And yet, wherever Elias went, he found the queen's gaze. She never showed more than a flicker of expression, but she noticed him. At councils, she asked for his opinion even when others objected. During meals, she would pause and watch as he told a light story, or commented on some odd detail. She said little, but he could feel her attention like the weight of a star. One evening, he was invited to a formal dinner in her private hall. The chamber was smaller than the throne room, though still vast compared to human standards. A long table stretched between them, covered with crystalline dishes and alien fruits that glowed faintly in the dim light. The courtiers lined the edges of the room, silent as ever, watching. The queen entered, her presence commanding the room. She moved with grace, every step precise, her garments flowing like liquid light. Elias stood and bowed slightly, but when she gestured for him to sit, he noticed something unusual. She had arranged the seating so that he was not at the far end of the table, as protocol would demand, but closer, within the space of conversation. As the meal began, Elias could feel the tension in the room. The courtier's eyes were sharp, their disapproval thick in the air. He picked up a piece of fruit, biting into it without hesitation. The taste was strange, sweet and bitter at once, and he laughed softly. "Your Majesty," he said, wiping his mouth with the cloth. "I think my tongue just discovered 3 flavors it didn't know existed." The room froze. One of the courtiers shifted, horrified. Joking at the royal table was unthinkable. Elias pretended not to notice and continued eating. To his surprise, the queen tilted her head slightly. "You find our food amusing?" she asked. "Not amusing," Elias said with a grin. "Surprising. Humans like surprises. We like to taste something new and say, 'Well, I didn't see that coming.' It keeps life interesting." The queen's eyes studied him in silence. The courtiers waited for her judgment. Instead of rebuking him, she said softly, "Interesting." Then she returned to her meal. Elias smiled to himself. Another crack in the wall. In the following days, her questions grew. At first they were about Earth, its governments, its science, its resources. But soon she asked stranger things. What did humans do when they were sad? Why did they tell stories that were not true? Why did they paint pictures of things that did not exist? Elias answered simply, always with that same easy charm. "We do those things because they make life brighter, because sometimes the world is too dark and we need light we make ourselves." One evening she summoned him alone to her garden, a place few had ever seen. Strange glowing plants filled the air with a soft hum, and pools of liquid light reflected the stars above. It was silent, but not cold. It felt alive in a way the rest of the palace did not. The queen walked beside him, her movements calm, her gaze forward. "You are unusual among your kind," she said. Elias chuckled. "I hear that a lot." "You are not afraid of me," she continued. "Others tremble when I speak. You smile." "Well," Elias said, glancing at her, "if I didn't smile, I'd probably just freeze like the rest of them. Smiling keeps me warm." For a moment, her lips curved again, just a flicker, but it was there. Elias caught it and grinned wider. "Careful, Your Majesty. You keep doing that and people will say you're falling in love with me." The words slipped out casually, half a joke, half a test. In the silence that followed, Elias expected the worst. The courtiers, hidden in the shadows of the garden, stiffened as if expecting execution on the spot. He almost raised his hands, in surrender, ready to apologize. But the queen turned to him slowly, her dark eyes fixed on his, and with a voice as steady as ever, she said, "Too late." The words struck him harder than any threat could have. For a long moment, Elias could only stare at her, stunned. The courtiers looked as if the ground had vanished beneath their feet. No one dared to breathe. The queen turned away, continuing her walk as though nothing unusual had been said. But Elias knew the truth. Something had shifted, something no one in that garden could deny. From that night on, everything changed. Whispers spread through the palace like wildfire. The queen had spoken words that no one thought possible. Her connection with the human envoy became the center of every conversation, every rumor. Some courtiers were horrified, others intrigued, but all were shaken. For Elias, it was both terrifying and exhilarating. He had meant it as a joke, a way to lighten the tension. But she had answered with a truth that could change the course of her empire. He lay awake that night staring at the ceiling of his chambers, trying to understand what it meant. Did she truly feel something for him? Or was it another layer of her unfathomable logic? Yet deep down he already knew the answer. He had seen it in her eyes just as he had on that first day. She was curious, yes. Fascinated, yes. But there was more. Something that went beyond logic. Something she herself might not fully understand. Thy, Queen of the Zirillan Empire, ruler of countless worlds, feared by all, had admitted, calmly, simply, that it was too late to be careful. And Elias Monroe, a human with nothing more than a smile and a sense of humor, had become the center of her universe. The palace had always been silent, but after the Queen's words in the garden, that silence grew heavier, darker. The courtiers spoke less when Elias walked by, though their stares burned with sharper intensity. He could feel the shift, the undercurrent of hostility. Whispers traveled behind closed doors, and even the guards, once expressionless, now glanced at him with suspicion. Elias understood what had happened. The Queen's admission, her calm, too late, was more than a private moment. It was a declaration, even if she had not meant it that way. The most powerful woman in the galaxy had revealed something that no one thought possible. Affection, directed not toward one of her own kind, but toward a human. To her court, it was weakness. To her rivals, it was an opportunity. The first attempt came 3 nights later. Elias was walking back to his quarters after a long meeting, his mind replaying every glance, every word from the Queen. He turned a corner and felt the air shift. Years of instinct told him something was wrong. The corridor was too empty. The shadows seemed thicker. He slowed his pace, forcing himself to look casual. Out of the darkness, 2 tall figures stepped forward, cloaked in dark armor. Their insect-like eyes gleamed faintly. They carried blades that shimmered like liquid light. "Envoy," one of them hissed softly. "You will not leave this hall alive." Elias's pulse raced, but he kept his expression calm. "You know," he said lightly. "Most assassins at least say something creative before they attack." That was boring. The assassins lunged. Elias dove sideways, his body hitting the wall hard. Pain shot through his shoulder, but adrenaline carried him. He grabbed a small metal torch from the wall, swinging it wildly. It was clumsy, but unexpected. One assassin stumbled back as the torch clanged against his helmet. Elias ducked another strike, rolling awkwardly on the cold floor. The guards arrived a heartbeat later, alerted by the noise. The assassins fled into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. The guards surrounded Elias, but instead of gratitude, their faces were unreadable. Some of them even looked disappointed. When the Queen heard what happened, her reaction shook the court. She did not dismiss it as an accident or a random attack. She summoned the guards, demanded answers, and her voice was sharper than steel. "No one touches him," she declared before the entire assembly. "Harm him, and you answer to me." The courtiers bowed, but Elias saw the truth in their eyes. Her words had only deepened the danger. The next weeks became a game of survival. Traps were laid in the halls, subtle changes in the floor, poisoned cups, shadows that moved where they shouldn't. Elias was no soldier, but he was human. And humans had a way of surviving where logic failed. He trusted his gut, the little instincts that warned him when something was wrong. He noticed the servant who always appeared too close, the food that smelled slightly bitter, the chair that seemed moved an inch to the side. Each time he acted, with a mix of caution and humor. Once he lifted a cup of glowing wine, paused, and said loudly, "Strange, I didn't order the kind that kills me instantly." The court froze, and when the wine was tested, it was revealed to be poisoned. Another time he found a blade hidden under his bed. Instead of panicking, he carried it straight into the council chamber and placed it on the table. "Someone left this for me," he said casually. "I assume it wasn't a gift." The courtiers shifted uncomfortably, and the Queen's gaze burned through them. The more they tried to end him, the more he exposed their schemes. Not because he was stronger or faster, but because he was unpredictable. Where the Zyrillans followed logic, Elias followed instinct. Where they expected fear, he gave them jokes. And each time he survived, the queen's attention grew sharper, her defense of him stronger. One night she summoned him to her private chamber. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of crystal lamps. She stood by the window, looking out over the endless city of Zyros Prime. "You are in danger every day," she said without turning. "They will not stop." Elias walked closer, his hands in his pockets. "I figured that out after the third poisoned drink. At least they're creative." She turned her gaze on him, her dark eyes piercing. "You laugh in the face of death. Why?" "Because if I don't laugh, I'll just be afraid," Elias said simply. "Fear won't save me. But maybe humor will." The queen was silent for a long time. Finally, she said, "You are unlike any being I have ever known. My people obey me because they fear me. My enemies respect me because I am unyielding. But you are fragile, unarmed, vulnerable, and yet you survive, not through strength but through something else. Human stubbornness?" Elias offered with a grin. She almost smiled. "Perhaps." Her gaze softened, only slightly. "They will call me weak for protecting you. They will call me a fool. But I do not care. I will not allow them to harm you." Elias felt a strange warmth at her words. He had never expected to find loyalty, let alone affection, in the heart of the coldest empire in the galaxy. Yet here, she was standing before him, risking her throne for a human. The court, however, was far from silent. Tension rippled through every hall. Nobles gathered in secret chambers whispering about rebellion. Some demanded that the queen cast him out to prove her strength. Others plotted to replace her with someone colder, someone untainted by human influence. The second major attempt came during a council meeting. A device hidden in the ceiling released a swarm of metallic insects, their wings sharp as blades. They filled the air, slicing through anything in their path. The courtiers scattered, but Elias acted on instinct. He grabbed the nearest heavy cloth, swinging it wildly. The swarm tangled in the fabric, buzzing angrily. He hurled it into a burning torch, and the insects exploded in a burst of sparks. When the smoke cleared, the courtiers stared at him in shock. The queen rose from her throne, her gaze sweeping the room. "Enough," she said, her voice like thunder. "This ends now. He is under my protection. He is not weak. He is not expendable. He is human, and he is vital." Her words echoed through the chamber, silencing all arguments. For the first time, she had declared not just her affection, but her belief that humanity itself mattered. That night, alone in his quarters, Elias lay awake. He knew things were spiraling. He had become more than an envoy, more than a guest. He had become a symbol, one that threatened the balance of an empire. He thought of her words, of the way she had stood for him before the entire court. He had never asked for this, never imagined it. And yet, part of him felt ready. The queen of the Zyrillans had chosen him, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Zyrillan Empire had always been feared, but after the queen's words defending Elias, fear began to mix with disbelief. Messages flew across the stars. Other empires whispered of weakness, of cracks in the unshakable throne. Rivals who had long waited for an opportunity now saw it. An alien queen who admitted attachment to a human. What could be more unthinkable? Soon, the demands arrived. Delegates from a coalition of rival species came together, sending a message to the palace. They demanded that Queen Sarilith renounce her attachment to the human envoy or face open war. To them, this was not only about politics, but about proving strength. If she kept him, she was admitting that her heart could be touched, that her decisions could be swayed by something irrational. The council chamber of the palace echoed with arguments. Nobles shouted in controlled voices, each trying not to sound desperate but failing. Some insisted the human be sent away quietly. Others wanted him executed to erase the problem entirely. Only a few, mostly younger nobles, remained silent. their eyes thoughtful. Elias sat at the edge of the chamber watching the storm. He had been through many dangerous meetings in his life, but nothing like this. He was not a warrior, not a leader of armies. He was just a man who smiled and spoke when others kept silent.
And yet now he was the center of a conflict that could set galaxies aflame. The queen sat upon her throne, listening. She did not interrupt, but her silence was heavier than any voice. When at last the chamber fell quiet, she rose. The council
"Of the galaxy has summoned us," she said, her voice carrying like thunder. "We will answer." Her advisors stiffened. Some tried to object, but she silenced them with a glance. "If they wish to judge me, they will do so to my face, and if they wish to test me, they will find my resolve unbroken." Elias followed her after the meeting, his steps quick. "Majesty," he said softly, "you don't need to risk this for me. If sending me away keeps peace, then maybe." She turned sharply, her eyes burning into his. "Do you think me so weak that I would betray my own choice?" He held her gaze, swallowing. "I just don't want you to risk your empire for me." Her expression softened, just slightly. "You still do not understand, Elias. This is not only about you. It is about what you represent. If I cast you aside, I cast aside what I have seen in humanity. Your courage, your humor, your defiance of fear. I will not." He had no answer to that. All he could do was walk beside her as the preparations began. The journey to the council world was long, but the Queen's flagship cut through the void with unmatched speed. Elias stood at the viewing deck, watching stars stretch into endless streaks. He had never felt smaller, yet at the same time never more aware of his place in history. He thought of Earth, of the people who had sent him here. Did they know what was happening? Did they understand that one human had changed the fate of empires? When they arrived, the Council's world loomed large, a planet encased in rings of light and towering stations. It was the heart of galactic law, where dozens of species gathered to settle disputes. The landing platforms were filled with ships of every shape, glowing with strange colors. The Queen walked into the council hall with Elias at her side. The chamber was immense, a circle of seats rising like a mountain around a central floor. Each seat held representatives of great powers, their forms strange and varied. Scaled creatures with burning eyes, crystalline beings that shimmered like glass, massive hulks covered in armor. They all turned as one when Sarilith entered, their gazes fixed not on her but on the human walking beside her. A voice echoed through the hall. "Queen Sarilith of Zyros, you stand accused of weakness. You have allowed your decisions to be clouded by affection for a human. Will you answer these charges?" The Queen stood tall, her presence filling the chamber. "I will answer." One of the rival leaders, a hulking creature with horns like blades, rose. "Cast aside this human. Prove that you are still the ruler we once feared, or face war against all of us." The chamber buzzed with agreement. Eyes turned to Elias, some filled with disgust, others with curiosity. He felt the weight of 100 civilizations pressing down on him. Elias stepped forward before the Queen could speak. "If I may," he said, his voice steady. The chamber grew quiet, surprised that he dared to speak. "You think I weaken her. You think I am nothing. But let me tell you what humans are. We are weak, yes, we are fragile. But we are also stubborn. We keep standing when we should fall. We laugh when we should cry. And we find light in the darkest places. That's why I'm still here. That's why she noticed me. Not because I'm powerful, but because I'm human." His words echoed, strange against the vast chamber. Many scoffed. Some leaned forward, curious. The Queen's gaze was on him, steady and unreadable. Then she stepped forward, her voice cutting through the air. "They call me weak for keeping him," she said. "But you are blind. You see only power as ships, armies, and fear. I see power in something greater." She gestured to Elias. "He has survived every attempt on his life, not with weapons, but with wit. He has faced me without fear, not because he is strong, but because he refuses to bow. He has shown me something none of you ever have, the freedom to choose not through fear, but through will. Her words grew louder, stronger. For centuries I have ruled with logic and order, but what has it given us? Fearful obedience, fragile loyalty. This human has given me something no empire ever has. Choice. And I choose him. The chamber erupted. Some shouted in outrage, others in disbelief. A few sat in silence, as if struck by revelation. The rival leaders fumed, their eyes burning with rage. You dare place affection above order? One of them roared. The queen's gaze turned to him, colder than a blade. No. I place truth above lies. I place strength above fear. And if you call this weakness, then you do not understand true power. The council could not silence the storm. Voices clashed, threats filled the air. But the queen stood calm, her hand resting lightly on Elias's shoulder. He felt the weight of her declaration, the danger it carried. And yet, for the first time, he also felt something stronger than fear. He felt pride. That night, as they left the chamber, Elias walked beside her in silence. Finally, he said softly, "You just declared war for me." She looked at him, her eyes steady. "No, I declared war for us." The stars outside the council world burned bright, as though the galaxy itself held its breath. A choice had been made, and nothing would ever be the same again. The moment Queen Sarilith declared before the Galactic Council that she chose Elias, the rival empires began preparing for battle. Their fleets, vast and deadly, gathered on the borders of the Zirillan Empire. Their leaders shouted that Sarilith had lost her reason, that she was no longer fit to rule, and that her weakness would be the downfall of her people. The Zirillan court trembled with division. Many nobles whispered of rebellion, furious that their queen would risk everything for a human. Others, though fewer in number, began to see something new in her choice, a spark of freedom that had never existed under endless order. For the first time, the empire felt uncertain, not because of weakness, but because of change. Through it all, Elias remained by Sarilith's side. He had no army, no weapons, no fleet. But he had her trust. He often wondered what power he truly had, a single human standing between empires. Yet he reminded himself of what he had always believed. Sometimes the smallest voice could shift the course of history. When the rival fleets entered Zirillan space, the queen summoned her generals. The war council filled with tall figures in dark armor, maps of stars glowing across the chamber. Cold strategies were presented: where to attack, where to retreat, how many soldiers would die. The room felt heavy with inevitability. Elias listened in silence until he could no longer. He stepped forward, his voice steady, though his heart raced. "You are planning this like every war before. But this war is not like the others. You think it is about ships and soldiers. It isn't. It's about an idea." The generals glared at him, offended that a human dared speak, but the queen raised her hand, silencing them. Her eyes never left Elias. "Explain," she said. "They believe you are weak because of me," Elias said. "So prove them wrong, not with more fear, but with something they can't understand. Humans win battles not only with strength, but with imagination, with things no enemy can predict. If you fight them on their terms, you'll lose what makes this different." The queen's gaze sharpened, considering his words. Slowly, she nodded. "Then we will fight them on yours." And so it began. The rival coalition advanced with overwhelming force. Their fleets cut through space like storms, confident they would shatter the Zirillans quickly. But they met resistance unlike any they had expected. For the first time in their long history, the Zirillans did not fight alone. Small human ships, old and outmatched by alien standards, appeared beside the Empire's armadas. Earth had sent what it could, not many vessels, not powerful ones, but crews filled with human stubbornness. They carried strange tactics, reckless courage, and endless improvisation. In the first battle, the coalition tried to predict Zirillan movements, expecting their usual cold logic. But Elias had advised otherwise. The fleets broke pattern, moving, in ways that seemed foolish, even random, until the enemy's careful calculations collapsed. Human ships darted between massive cruisers, laying traps, using decoys, even broadcasting music and laughter across enemy channels. The coalition commanders, used to strict order, could not keep up. The war spread across the stars. Again and again, the coalition pressed harder, and again they found their strategies disrupted by human unpredictability. A single frigate would lure an entire fleet into a trap. A squad of human pilots, badly outnumbered, would survive by daring maneuvers no one else would attempt. Each time the Queen's empire stood firm beside them, adapting, learning. But it was not only on the battlefield that humanity proved itself. On occupied worlds, where the coalition tried to spread fear, human diplomats and soldiers brought hope instead. They told stories, sang songs, reminded the oppressed that even in the darkest night there could be light. The idea spread like fire. If fragile humans could defy giants, then so could anyone. The coalition grew desperate. Their leaders gathered once more, furious. "This is madness," they shouted. "They fight without order, without logic. It cannot be sustained." But no matter how they adapted, they could not defeat it. For the first time, their cold strength was not enough. In the heart of the war, Elias remained at the Queen's side. He was no commander, yet she asked for his counsel daily. He reminded her of the human way, to risk, to trust, to laugh even in danger. She listened, and slowly, her empire changed. Soldiers began to cheer in the face of impossible odds. Citizens began to speak freely in ways they never had. Loyalty grew not from fear but from pride. The final battle came above the world of Arcanas, where the coalition brought its largest fleet. Thousands of ships filled the skies, their weapons bright enough to outshine stars. The Queen's forces were smaller, outnumbered, yet they stood ready. Elias watched from the command deck, his heart pounding. "This is it," he said softly. The Queen turned to him, her gaze steady. "Are you afraid?" "Terrified," Elias admitted with a grin. "But that's how I know it matters." The battle raged like thunder. The coalition's numbers pressed hard, their firepower devastating. But again, the Zerillans and their human allies fought with unpredictability. They feigned retreats, then struck from unexpected angles. They used damaged ships as decoys, luring enemy cruisers into ambushes. Human pilots flew in reckless patterns, forcing enemy gunners to miss. Slowly, impossibly, the tide turned. At the height of the battle, the Queen herself took command of the lead ship, her voice carrying across the fleet. "For too long we ruled with fear, no longer. Today we fight not because we must, but because we choose, and we will win." Her words ignited her people. The Zerillans fought with new fire, their precision sharpened by something greater than obedience. The coalition began to falter, disbelief spreading among their ranks. When at last the enemy flagship was destroyed in a blaze of fire, the battle ended. The coalition retreated, broken not only in strength but in spirit. They had faced something they could not understand, and they had lost. The galaxy changed that day. In the aftermath, worlds once ruled by fear began to hope. The Queen of the Zerillans, once the coldest ruler in history, now stood as the symbol of a new era. She did not hide what had happened. Before the council once again, she declared, "We were wrong to think love and laughter were weakness. Humanity has shown us that they are strength. We will not return to silence. We will not return to chains." Elias stood beside her, stunned by how far it had come. He had arrived as a simple envoy, nothing more than a man with a smile. Now he was the partner of a queen, the symbol of a new alliance and the spark that had changed the course of civilizations. Later, when the halls were quiet and the stars stretched beyond the windows, Elias turned to her with a half-smile. "You know," he said softly. "All of this started with a joke." The Queen looked at him, her dark eyes softer than they had ever been. "No," she said. "It started with truth. The joke was only the door. You were the light that entered. For the first time, Elias had no words. He only smiled, knowing that the galaxy itself would never be the same again.